on mute.
Oh,
Good. Yeah. Yes, fine, thank you. Fine, thank you. I'm
Great.
okay. Looking forward to the talk. Should be interesting.
That's very interesting, yeah.
hi, Sheila.
Okay.
I missed Tanya before. I was upstairs when apparently she was on the local news.
Yeah, she was.
Yes, I've just been sent it on WhatsApp. There's a clip going around now.
I'll try going on catch up on the computer, see if I can see it. Never remember the name for it.
East Midlands Today. On that, it'll be on Netflix, I guess. I don't know.
Did
but
you
it's
say, Susan?
It's East Midlands Today, and it'll be
Yeah.
on Netflix, I guess. But I don't know how. It's a half-hour program, and it's only a 2-minute segment. So
Yeah, I don't know how you find it like that.
somebody will probably know. If we find out, we'll pass it around.
No, that's a good idea.
I mean, it's funny because it's a Nottingham local news about her being in Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's also on the Elstree local news.
Yeah.
Or she's still more of a celebrity in Nottingham than in Elstree. Yeah,
Sorry, I've just come in on this. Did I hear something about getting it? Because I've got it, I filmed it as it was going on and have it on my phone and send it to people if that's any use.
Ah.
In fact, I've sent it to a few people.
Okay, shall we make a start?
Thank you, Sue.
Do you want to, Kathy and Norman, do you want to mute everybody and we'll make a start?
Yeah, I'm just looking to see. I think most people are. Most people seem to be muted.
Except us.
Except,
Good.
except-
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself now. I'll communicate.
Okay. Well, I hope you can hear me. So I'm not muted. I just wanted to welcome you all to this talk this evening. One or two minor sort of housekeeping rules, if I can say. You have all been muted, and the Zoom host will actually try and keep people apart from the speaker muted during the course of the evening until we come to the question and answer session. Just in case you haven't noticed, the talk is being live streamed to both our Facebook channel and to our YouTube channel, and it's being recorded because some people indicated they couldn't watch it this evening but did want to watch it later. And if anybody does want to watch it, the easiest way to access it is through the Nottingham Liberal Synagogue YouTube channel. I thought about having this talk in a slightly odd way. I was talking to one of my colleagues in Nottingham, Dara Lee Coppell, and Dara was talking to me about her own childhood and the experience of growing up in Belfast during the Troubles, and the impact it had on her and on her family. And it, to me, not having had that experience, it was incredibly moving. And I asked Dara if she would be prepared to do a talk on it for me, and maybe even rope her father in to talk a bit about it from his perspective. However, what she did instead is kindly find Stephen, who agreed to do the talk today. If you haven't had a chance to read the flyer, Stephen grew up in Belfast in the 1970s and 80s, which he describes as the right place at the wrong time. He currently directs Belfast Jewish Heritage, which promotes the history of the Jewish community in Northern Ireland and leads Jewish walking tours through Belfast city centre. In 2021, Belfast Jewish Heritage received a grant from the Northern Ireland Office and National Lottery Heritage Fund to mark the centenary of Northern Ireland. Stephen lives in Northwest London, has worked as an advocacy consultant to the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, and currently to Magen David Adom, UK. He also co-chairs Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. So Stephen, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us tonight, and over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Chucky Arla, that's Irish. It doesn't mean good evening. It means our day will come. With an Armalite in one hand and a ballot box in the other, we will take power in Ireland. That's Sinn Féin. For God and Ulster, not an inch, not a mile, no surrender. That's Ulster loyalism. Yep, I grew up in Northern Ireland as a member of the very small Jewish community. And as you've heard, I describe it as the right place at the wrong time. So what do I mean by the right place? Well, I lived on the side of a hill overlooking Belfast Loch. There was a beautiful castle on the hill. 15 minutes from where I lived, you could be in the most beautiful countryside. Think of your image of the west coast of Ireland, and we've got countryside just as nice in Northern Ireland. 15 minutes in the other direction and you're in Belfast city centre. So in a sense, it was a wonderful place to grow up. In the wrong time, as I'll discuss this evening, I grew up in the 70s and 80s during the time of the Troubles. So a big thank you to everyone tuning in today for your interest. Thank you to Dara, who reached out originally to me, to you, Mike, for all the arrangements and everyone behind the scenes. So what I'm going to do this evening is, first of all, we're all going to fly over to Belfast, which would be great. We're going to go East Midlands Airport. We're going to get EasyJet. And within an hour, we're going to land in Belfast. And I'll tell you a little bit about the Jewish community in Northern Ireland today. What would you find if you were to visit Belfast today regarding its Jewish community? I'm then going to give you a short history, a brief history of the community, which goes back 150 years. So I'll do it briefly. But I think that will provide the context of what I'm going to say about my own experiences growing up in Belfast. 3 facts to bear in mind about the Belfast Jewish community as I discuss it with you. It's very much like every other regional Jewish community. Coming from Nottingham, you will know exactly the chronology of the Jewish community, its rise, its decline, etc. A lot of it will be very familiar to you, but there are 3 factors which I think make the Belfast Jewish community a little bit distinctive. The first one is its relative isolation. So if you live in a small community in England, you can be in Manchester, in Leeds, or in London. You take the train, you could be there perhaps in an hour. For Belfast, you're going to have to get on a plane, get on a ferry if you're going to be in a large Jewish community. Dublin is 100 miles to the south. Never a bigger community than Belfast, but never really a very big community. You're talking about Dublin at its height, about 4,000 or 5,000 Jews. Today, much fewer than that. So it's geographically a little bit more isolated. The second thing about the Belfast Jewish community is it takes place in its own separate jurisdiction. Northern Ireland has been a separate state. We've just heard it's marked its centenary last year. So during that time, the Jewish community has existed in a devolved part of the United Kingdom with its own parliament, its own legal system, etc. And allied to that is the third factor, which in terms of the society, the environment, political environment, Northern Ireland is very distinctive. We're going to be talking about the conflict between Unionists and Nationalists, between Catholics and Protestants, and how the small Jewish community navigated itself through all of that is a very distinctive feature of the Belfast Jewish community, which isn't quite replicated anywhere else. So bear those 3 facts in mind. So we are now landed in Belfast, and we're going to visit the shul. And there is only one shul in the whole of Northern Ireland, and there has only been one shul there. You'd have to go back to, I think, the very early 20th century for there to be more than one synagogue at a time in Belfast. It's an Orthodox shul, by which I mean it is run on Orthodox lines, although its membership would come from the entire spectrum of Jewish belief and non-belief, practice and non-observance. So varied in that sense, but an Orthodox synagogue. Its numbers, well, it always kind of makes me sigh to have to say this. It's about 60 members of the Belfast Jewish community. When I grew up, there was perhaps 200, 250. It's declined since then, and we're now talking about 60 members roughly, and the average age would be in advance of 60, quite considerably. It is a community of retired people. There's no children, there's no cheder, or very few children. It is by and large an elderly community. It has an impact in Northern Ireland which is out of all proportion to its size. It still has a full-time resident minister, a beautiful synagogue. It dates from October 1964, and I know that because I was born on the same week that the synagogue opened. I was born on the Wednesday and the synagogue opened on the Sunday. So it has been cut in half over the years because of the diminishing numbers. It's a round synagogue, which is quite unusual, very striking design in its time, very award-winning, a modern interior. The women's section is not in a high gallery. It's very much part and parcel of the prayer hall. And today there is a social centre next door to the synagogue. And pre-COVID, the community was doing amazing outward-facing work. They had a senior citizens club, met every Wednesday fortnight, bringing in elderly members of the Jewish community, but much wider as well. There is a thriving branch of the Council of Christians and Jews. There are a large number of schools, church groups, community groups coming around the synagogue. And in that sense, the community is doing great work in terms of education and outreach. Today they would have a Shabbat service and they will struggle to get the minyan because of both the diminished numbers and elderly community, and particularly with COVID. It's a very difficult time for the community. You may be aware that there's an issue around the bringing in of kosher food into Northern Ireland because of Brexit. The arrangements, it's called the sea border, bringing in goods from the rest of Great Britain into Northern Ireland now requires a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork, and when you have a very small community, a tiny market, it is impractical to bring in kosher meat. So the community is really trying to knock heads together between the EU and the British government to come up with a solution that 60 Jews in Northern Ireland can get kosher meat. And if they can't agree to that, well, what chance have we got to a greater agreement, I ask you. So that is the community today in a nutshell. And I'm going to take you through a little bit about the history of the community. And in a sense, it's very close, I think, very parallel to the Nottingham Jewish community's history. The earliest Jews, the founding members of the Belfast Jewish community, came in about the middle of the 19th century. And as Nottingham had the lace trade, so Belfast had the linen industry. And the earliest members of the Belfast Jewish community were German linen merchants. Some of them bear my own family name. The name Jaffe is very prominent in the Belfast Jewish community's history. The founder of the community was a man called Daniel Joseph Jaffe from Hamburg. And if you visit Belfast, there's a lovely ornate little fountain to his memory. His son, Sir Otto Jaffe, was the Lord Mayor of Belfast, the only Jewish Lord Mayor of the city. It's a great disappointment to me that I'm not related to them because they were very wealthy linen merchants. Another family which actually had branches in Nottingham and in Belfast was the Weinberg family. So there were two brothers, Jacob, who went to Nottingham and was the founder of May and Company, which is one of the biggest linen manufacturers in the 19th century. His brother, Isaac Julius, went to Belfast and started there a linen firm. So it was textiles that brought the first Jews in, and Belfast's growth as a town. It was one of the fastest growing urban centres in the British Isles in the 19th century. It was driven by linen, and these Jewish merchants who exported linen around the world were key drivers in the growth of the city. The other great industry that Belfast is noted for is shipbuilding. It built the Titanic, and the firm there, the biggest shipbuilders in the world in its day, was the firm of Harland and Wolff. Gustav Wolff was a German Jewish industrialist. He was baptized as a child. His parents were baptized. He didn't have any connection with the Belfast Hebrew congregation at that time, but many of his family connections were involved in the shipping industry, and he was instrumental in the growth of the firm of Harland and Wolff. Then, as in other parts of the British Isles in the late 19th century, there was a wave of immigration from Eastern Europe, and my own family came from Lublin in Poland. Why did they end up in Belfast? People always ask me. Many families have a story, and they'll say, well, they were tricked by the sea captains, by the travel agents of the day in ports in Europe, tricked into thinking they bought their tickets to New York. But in fact, when the boat docked in an Irish port to take on Irish immigrants, they'd only had tickets paid for there, and they were forced off the ship. It's even said by some families, well, they heard English spoken on the dock, and they thought, when they arrived in Cork or wherever it was, that they thought they'd landed in America. These are just stories. It's a lot more complicated than that. There's families, a pioneer set up in Belfast, made a living, wrote back to his shtetl in Eastern Europe, told them they could make a living there, and attracted his cousins and siblings to come. And that is how the Belfast Jewish community that you see today, that's how many of the families originated from. One of them being the Koppel family, would be a typical Belfast family that you can trace through 3 or 4 generations. And again, another family which spans Belfast and Nottingham. So this little, as I've said, slightly isolated Jewish community has produced an amazing number of Jewish people who have starred on the world stage. So Belfast, just over a century ago, had a future chief rabbi of Israel living in it, a future president of Israel living in it, and a future foreign minister of Israel living in it. That is Isaac Herzog, who goes on to become, Belfast was his first position as rabbi. He goes on to become chief rabbi of the Irish Free State, that's in Dublin, and then becomes chief rabbi, Ashkenazi chief rabbi in the land of Israel. His son, who was born in Belfast, Chaim Herzog, becomes president. He was born in Belfast in 1918. And amazingly, at the same time that he was born, living just round the corner was a young boy called Aubrey Solomon, who was a evacuee during the First World War. And he becomes more famous as Abba Eban, Israel's foreign minister and leading diplomat of the 20th century. All 3 of them living in Belfast just over a century ago. On the same street as the Herzogs, slightly earlier, lived a man who became foreign minister of the Soviet Union under Stalin, Maxim Litvinov. He was a Bolshevik. He was an exile from Tsarist Russia. His sister lived in Belfast, and he happened to live on the same street, Clifton Park Avenue, as in future the future president and chief rabbi. So it has an amazing history. The first Oscar winner, first British Oscar winner, the first Jewish Oscar winner was a Belfast-born Jew called Benjamin Glaser. Not many people know it. If it ever comes up in a pub quiz, you've learned it tonight. You can look him up, Benjamin Glaser. So this is amazing. And doing walking tours of Belfast Jewish heritage, it is full of amazing stories like that. The local Jewish community, typical again of regional Jewish communities, contributed enormously to the economic life of Belfast, to its cultural life and professional life. In terms of its economic life, some well-known high street stores started in Belfast. Beaverbrooks, the jewellers, the Addleston brothers started off, their first shop was in Belfast. A man called Leonard Steenberg, he was casinos, bookies, leisure, Stanley Leisure was his company, again, another national quoted company, started off in Belfast. He had to leave because of the troubles. He was actually shot at his front door. He went to Manchester, he grew his business. But interestingly, when he was made a peer, he became a member of the House of Lords. He chose as his title, Lord Steenburg of Belfast. He didn't lose sight of where he came from. Culturally, the world of dance, of cinema, of visual art. I could mention a lot of Belfast Jews who would be well known in Northern Ireland, perhaps not so much nationally. A couple of actors, Harry Tobe was an actor you may have heard of, Harold Goblat, another professional actor. For the internal life of the Jewish community, intensely, I would say, a close-knit community. We had a Chevra Gemara, that's a class learning the Talmud on a daily basis. They completed Talmud on 5 occasions. So that's 11 years it took for each cycle. That's a measure of the orthodoxy of the older community. We had a club, the Belfast Jewish Institute, which was a social centre. And I think you can only understand a community so small having a centre, a social club quite like this one, because as I've mentioned, that isolation required it to be very self-sufficient. This club had tennis courts, a wonderful catering facilities, a ballroom. Bob Monkhouse appeared at the Belfast Jewish Institute. So it was an amazing endeavour for the Jewish community to put on. At its height, the Belfast Jewish community numbered no more than 1,500. That would have been just after the Second World War. There was a third wave of people coming to Northern Ireland as refugees from Nazi Germany immediately before the war. The community sponsored a refugee farm just outside Belfast called the Malal Farm. It took in kinder transport, older refugees, and many of these refugees established industries in Northern Ireland. If you go to some of the towns outside of Belfast, like Strabane and Cookstown and Portadown, you will find that some of the biggest employers of those towns were established by Jewish refugees who came from Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, as refugees from Nazism. So that's really the potted history of the Jewish community. I'm going to take you now into the 1960s, is when I come onto the scene. I was born there, as I've said, October 1964, the same week that Belfast Synagogue opened. I was born on the Antrim Road. That's where my family lived, where the majority of the Jewish people were then living in North Belfast. There was a kosher butcher's in those days. We had a delicatessen, Levy's delicatessen. So I was born into the heart of this little community. And when I was 5 years old in 1969, that was the start of the Troubles. So I'm a little bit younger than Sir Kenneth Branagh. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to see the film Belfast, but his memories are slightly different from mine because he is that little bit older. So he remembers the explosion of communal violence in the streets of the late 1960s. I don't. I can't remember Bloody Sunday or Bloody Friday, which was in 1972. The anniversaries this year. I really became politically aware, it's probably a bit of grand because I'm only 9 years old, become aware of the Troubles. If I could pin it on anything, I would say it was in October 1973 and Yom Kippur of that year. Of course, you will remember Yom Kippur in 1973 because that was the start of the Yom Kippur War. In Belfast, on that day, the body of a soldier was brought to the synagogue. He'd been killed in Londonderry in an explosion. He had been manning a post in the Cregan estate in Londonderry. He was 23 years old. There was a parcel that he accepted. They were anticipating this parcel to come, but it had been interfered with by the IRA. The parcel exploded. He lost his life. And another soldier beside him was blinded, had a hand amputated, and remarkably, he was Jewish too. I can't explain. I don't think there are that many Jewish soldiers. Of course, there are Jews who serve in the armed forces, but to have two in the same post and caught up in that horrible, horrible incident is quite extraordinary. I remember as a 9-year-old that happening. Slightly older children and the adults took it in turns to shomer over the body, to guard the body in a traditional fashion. And he was taken for burial. I think he's buried in Aldershot in the military cemetery there. A young man called Lindsay Dobby. So at 10 years old in 1974, I certainly remember the Ulster workers' strike. And this was something which kind of paralysed the province. There was an attempt by the British government to have a power-sharing government in Northern Ireland, bringing together both unionists and nationalists. This was taking place with the background of the IRA campaign and loyalist violence. The IRA and Sinn Féin had no part politically in those days, so these were the constitutional parties coming together. The main unionist party was split over it. There was a huge reaction, and I remember the strike. I remember barricades across the streets. I remember being told on the radio that Ulster was on the brink of chaos. That was a phrase that was being used. So in 1977, I had my bar mitzvah, and only 2 of my family members came over to Belfast for my bar mitzvah. And one of the reasons for that was my older brother had had his bar mitzvah in 1973. Many more had come over. They'd stayed in a hotel, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a bomb scare in the hotel. They all ended up in the street. And surprisingly, they didn't fancy coming back in 1977. So that was a little measure of isolation, really. In 1980, as a 16-year-old, I was on the scene of a killing. I was at a football match. And the policeman was killed at the match. Now, I wasn't so close, but close enough. And something like that, you never forget. Very strangely, I do a lot of kind of interfaith engagement in Northern Ireland, and I met a church leader, and it turns out that he was the son of the policeman. It's a very small world over there. The following month, a member of our community was murdered, Leonard Caitser. He was a businessman. He was abducted. There was a claim that they wanted a £1 million ransom for him. His sons endeavoured to do the best they could. But I remember that on the Shabbat morning, hearing that he had been killed. In 1981, when I was doing my O-levels, that was the time of the hunger strikes. So again, a lot of violence going on around me. I left Belfast in September 1983 to go to university. My parents said to me, "Stephen, you're better off leaving." The week that I left was the time of a Maze prison escape. 38 prisoners had escaped from the prison the week that I left, and making my way to the ferry at Larne to take the ferry across Britain, we had to cross so many security checkpoints to get to the ferry. In some respect, I would say I've never left Belfast. Prior to COVID, I would have been back maybe 10 times a year. My mum lived there until quite recently. And I do, as been mentioned, I co-chair the Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. I do Belfast Jewish heritage work. It's a part of me, even though it is now very much the case that I've lived much longer in England than I ever did in Northern Ireland. So having given you that rather grim kind of chronological order of what I remember, I want to say something very different before I finish, and I really want to hear your comments and questions. I think let's have some conversation would be great. But having told you all of that, my memories of growing up in Belfast are of a sheltered and protected childhood. It seems, strange having shared with you what I have. And what do I mean by that? And I look back on it and I think of the efforts that my family made to protect me as a child, that the community did, the Jewish community in terms of the normality of the childhood that I had, and also the huge effort of the schools that I went to give me a normal schooling. Everything you would expect of a school that had its orchestra, its dramatic society, debating society. It was a very normal childhood in certain respects. I remember the Jewish youth group that I grew up with, the B'nai Akiva youth group. I remember intervisits to Dublin. I had an interest in football. I was going to the football matches coming from Northern Ireland. Obviously, you either support Rangers or Celtic or Man United in Liverpool. That was very much part of my childhood. And I had a great social circle of friends within the Jewish community and wider. It was small, my contemporaries in the Jewish community in terms of numbers, and it got smaller. When I started my secondary school, there was perhaps 30 Jewish pupils at it. By the time I left in 1983, that had been greatly reduced to about 7 or 8. But we were very close friends, and that is something that I remember. A very significant part of my childhood was its normality, despite everything else going on around us. And I sometimes wonder, was it very selfish to have that kind of normality? Or actually, was that the ultimate triumph over the violence and extremism that was going on around us, that we could maintain as best we could normal lives? So I'm going to end at that point and throw it open to you. Perhaps some of you have seen the film, which I haven't yet. Perhaps some of you have visited Belfast. I know some of you are actually from Belfast. There's probably much sharper stories to tell than I have regarding your own experiences. So I'm really going to throw it over to you and look forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Stephen, thank you very much for that. That was a fantastic introduction to Belfast from your own perspective, and giving us the history of it as well. So please, anybody who wants to ask questions, if you can put your hand up physically or virtually, we'll try and pick up anybody who wants to either ask a question or give a comment. And if nobody puts their hand up, I'm going to pounce on 1 or 2 people, perhaps the obvious 2 that I can see on my screen. But yeah, Mike Sokol. You'll have to unmute yourself, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much for that talk. Let me say that we have in Nottingham a person who's called Jaffe, spelt Jaffe, and the E has an acute accent on it. So he was Jaffe, and I'm very proud of it. He's dead now, sadly. I knew him only through his latter years, when I think he was retired. But I actually met the family at work. I was an oncologist, and his daughter was a patient of mine, and she's done extremely well, cured of her tumor, and she now lives in London, having moved down.
Granddaughter.
Oh, was it a granddaughter?
Granddaughter, yeah. But the 2 daughters are still in Nottingham, aren't they?
Right, okay. Widow, Ernest was his first name. His widow is still alive, and I see her quite...
No, you see the daughters.
No.
Yes.
Mike,
We're having
can we let you and Sue have an argument off
yes.
Sorry.
and we'll see if anybody else wants to.
Okay, so and I think he came over as part of the kinder transport, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, so
Again, not a relation of mine. It's good to see you again. I remember you from the Board of Deputies. That's going back a bit, but lovely to see you again. Not a relation of mine, I'm afraid.
no, but it just shows that Jaffe is a not uncommon name, even though it's the only family I know with that name. And I don't know if you have, well, you have obviously the family you mentioned, but I don't know if you come across any others.
As you say, it's not unknown, it's not uncommon name, but again, not. And there's derivations. So there's another family in the Belfast Jewish community called Jaffe with an A. So presumably we're all related somewhere along the line, but going back a very long way.
Thank you, Mike. Other questions? Yeah, Ray Sylvester. You'll have to unmute as well.
What sort of school did you go to? Your secondary school? I mean, presumably in Northern Ireland at the time, what do you call it, Ulster? It was either Protestant school or Catholic school. What sort did you go to? And presumably it was denominational. If it was denominational, what impact did that have on you as a little Jewish kid?
Absolutely. So yes, you're absolutely right. There is an integrated stream of schools, which is growing, but would be, I think even today, although it has grown, you're talking about maybe 10, 15% of children. You have Catholic schools, yes, and state schools, which are in effect Protestant schools. So I went to a grammar school. I got a very good education, I have to say. I passed my 11 plus and went to a school called the Belfast Royal Academy, which is in its origins as a Presbyterian school. It's an old school. It goes back about 200 years. Traditional grammar school. It was where the majority of the Jewish children went to. That's partly geographical, because the school is located certainly where the original Jewish settlers lived in North Belfast, and it's where my mother went to and I went to, and so it had a strong, relatively strong Jewish presence in it. As I said, when I started the school in the late 70s, there was perhaps 30 Jewish pupils there. It didn't regard itself as, I think, a denominational school, but at the time during the Troubles, I would say about 10% of the pupils were Kafka. And that was actually quite high at that time. It considered itself a very liberal school. The ethos of the school was liberal. I would say liberal Presbyterian. That would be my take on it. It had a very strong evangelical presence as well, a strong Christian Bible Union. So as a Jew, we were made to feel part and parcel of the school. As I said, I wasn't the first generation to go there. There had been my parents' generation before me. The school was well disposed. It's said of a previous headmaster to my one that he would send Jewish pupils who came to school on Yom Tov, he'd send them home, telling them to go to shul rather than to go to school. So the school was very well used to its Jewish pupils. It was, an excellent education. It certainly, it got me to a scholarship in the Cambridge College entrance exam. So it's the quality of the education was second to none. If a comparable school in England, you'd have been paying huge school fees for that. So I've had a very privileged education in that respect.
Stephen, before I go to Susan, who's had her hand up for a while, can I just get Dara to say what she said on the chat a minute ago?
Yeah, hi. I was just laughing when you were talking, Stephen, because I can remember you quite often got asked what religion you were. If they couldn't distinguish what religion you were from the uniform you were wearing from the school that you went to, they would ask you what religion you were. And I can remember once being asked, and I said that I was Jewish, and they immediately said, were you a Catholic Jew? Are you a Catholic Jew or you a Protestant Jew? And it was just, they were determined to get you to land on one side, and you never knew what the right answer was going to be. So at that point, you just ran like the clappers, really, to get away.
Ran as fast as you could. So that was a common experience. And what do they mean by that? It sounds obviously absurd, but Catholic and Protestant has a political connotation as well as a faith connotation. It's a tribal connotation, if you like. Which tribe do you belong to? And the ways that people in Northern Ireland, the tactics people use to determine whether someone is a Catholic or a Protestant, well, you ask them where they're from, that will give it away. What school they went to will very often give it away. What newspaper you read, there's the Unionist newsletter, there's the Nationalist Irish news. So there's various devices that people use to sound out to who they're talking to without directly asking the question. But sometimes, as Dara says, you were very directly asked the question and it was fairly intimidating. And as you said, if you didn't give the right answer, you had to run pretty quickly.
Thank you. Susan, Susan, yes.
Yes, so I'd kind of taken my hand down because some of it has been answered by Ray's question, but actually I want to ask, you may not have any more to say, but I'm curious about what your relationship was with the non-Jewish kids in the school. So as you said, the staff were very accommodating and understanding. Did you have, because there was a sizable number of Jewish kids, did you interact with the Protestant or Catholic kids? Were they interested? Were they not? How did it work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very well integrated with the wider body in the school. Yeah, so there was never enough Jewish people that you could, it's not like growing up in Northwest London or growing up in parts of Manchester or wherever, where you can live a very secluded, if you like, or inward looking, if you like, Jewish existence. That was never possible just because of the numbers. There was never a Jewish day school. We had a cheder, an after school religious class, but not a day school. So yes, most of my friends would not have been Jewish. We had elections for prefects. I was elected deputy head boy, which was, a big thing. I didn't play rugby. It was a very rugby playing school, very sporty. So I didn't kind of fit in that circle particularly well. But yes, majority of my friends were not from the Jewish community, although my closest friends were. And I think, we did have a very close knit group of maybe 7 or 8 of us, roughly the same age, and they were the core of my social life, but very much part and parcel of the wider community as well.
Great, thank you.
Robert has asked a question, and I don't know whether he wants to ask it himself or I can ask it for him. No? Okay. Robert said, what about Belfast no-go areas? You never needed to go there. Didn't that limit your leisure time?
Well, yeah, like I was saying, in many cities, there are places that you probably don't go to at night. There in Belfast, yes, there would have been parts of the city that I hardly knew. Certainly parts of Northern Ireland that I'd never ventured to. Yeah, we kind of stuck to our own areas. I think that's probably true. The city centre, I remember it in the 70s, there was a ring of security fences around the city centre. You needed to be frisked if you were going into the major shopping district. You were searched going into the shops, which I thought was normal. Almost when I first came to England, I was standing at Marks and Spencer's going like this to the door waiting to be frisked. But that's the way it was. The city centre emptied about 5 o'clock. It wasn't the place that you hung around by and large. And as I said, we grew up in this Antrim Road area. It was a middle class area, not a big area, but that's where we would have spent most of our time. We had friends across town, yes, but there would have been huge parts of Belfast that I didn't know that well. And that was, yeah, part and parcel of the times and no-go areas, not no-go areas in that you weren't allowed to go there, but, just as in, I would guess, in parts of London today and parts of many British cities, there might be areas that would have trouble and stuff. So did it cramp our leisure time? Not really aware of it. I would say that, yes, I'm sure it must have been difficult for my parents, if we were out, worrying where we were and when we were coming back. That's the worry that parents have wherever they are. But I would say in Belfast in the 70s and 80s, that was possibly a bigger concern, and you always no mobile phones in those days, of course, so it was difficult to tell your parents that you were okay and when you were coming home and all the rest of it. So that was probably more stressful for my parents than it was for me.
Janet, did you want to ask anything or comment on your experience growing up in Belfast? Do you want to unmute yourself? You're muted.
There we go. I'm there now. Yes, I
was born a good bit earlier than you, Stephen, and actually left Belfast around about 1969. My maiden name was Kafka. I don't know if that name means anything to you in your...
Absolutely. I'm friends with Barry. I know Barry, your brother.
Yes, you know Barry, my brother. I don't know if he's joined tonight or if he's remembered or not. I don't know. He's not. So I grew up, my childhood was placed slightly earlier. Again, I went to an all-girls grammar school. But again, my experiences, I would say, would echo yours very much, very well integrated, very few Jewish girls in my school, but it didn't make any difference. Everybody got on and there just wasn't a problem at all, really, as far as education, making friends and so on. I can very much echo what Dara said about, are you a Catholic Jew or a Protestant Jew? We've all experienced that. And you could certainly tell. What I do remember very much, how the division of the schools, the Catholics were very much of their schools and their uniforms were somehow distinctive, and everybody else went to the state schools, the other schools, which by default tended to be Protestant, although the Catholics were allowed to go, but they seemed to somehow choose, they chose not to. My father was a refugee from Nazism, from the Czech Republic, from Czechoslovakia as it was then, and came eventually to Belfast just after the war and set up a manufacturing factory making artificial pearls. And it did fine, it did very well, but of course, towards when the Troubles started, it was actually firebombed at least twice, as far as I remember. By that time, I was already studying in England. But the second time it was destroyed, my father, he was older then. My parents, were both were living in England at that time. They then decided that's enough, and they actually closed the factory, which was a great shame because I think it did contribute quite a lot. It employed quite a few people and, contributed to the fabric of Belfast, really. I have very happy memories of my childhood, I have to say. I do remember around about 1968, 69 bombs going off. And I certainly remember when I came back from holiday from England back to Belfast to visit them, hearing explosions and so on, and being quite relieved I didn't have to stay there. So I think it did affect me, but not that much. But it affected my family. And it's really interesting to hear your talk, how it affected you growing up that little bit later than me. So thank you very much for sharing all those memories with us.
Thank you, Janet. One thing I'd like to share with everyone is an initiative that we're about to launch, because you'll be interested in this, Janet. It's the Belfast Northern Ireland Jewish Heritage Map. It's going to be online. It's got about over 60 locations on it, and your parents' factory is one of the locations, and we're telling a Jewish story of these 60 locations right across Northern Ireland. Outside of Belfast, there were little communities in Lurgan and in Londonderry in the early 20th century. So we're telling those stories. So it's belfastjewishheritage.org. It's already online, so you haven't launched it formally, but take a look. My colleague Bernard Enlander, who I think is on this evening, has looked into the history of your own family's involvement and the factory. So take a look at that and give us your comments and corrections. But it's a major initiative, and we very much hope people will come onto the map to discover a little bit more about the Jewish community of Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Is that the same thing that Stanley Koppel is involved in? Because he sent Barry and I quite a lot of information recently that he wanted us to go through.
Yeah, so Bernard has been speaking to Stanley, and let's work through that way, yes.
Yes. Very interesting. It's all come together at a similar time. Your talk and getting all the emails from Stanley. I thought, my goodness, all this from so many years ago.
Karen, next.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Stephen. It was a really interesting talk. My mum's family is actually from Dublin, which obviously very different experience, but, similar kind of, the Irish thing. Anyway, what I wanted to ask you is, did your parents leave? It's interesting when you went to England, they said you'd be better off there. I was just wondering if they followed you.
Well, that would be a classic pattern, actually, that younger people perhaps graduating from university with professional degrees, went to Queen's University in Belfast, perhaps qualified in medicine. Well, they could go wherever they wanted to in the world, really, and they often did. And then the parents would follow later on. So that's a classic thing which happened in many times. My parents held out. My father died in Belfast. My mother lasted until she was about 85 on her own over there. She had cousin and a niece and family, but both me and my brother were living in England. So at the age of 85, she finally agreed to come to England and was living close to my brother. But my mum is, Belfast through and through, and she complains living in England now that the people have funny accents and she can't understand a word that they're saying. So there you go. So yes, that was very common. My own parents stayed on.
Thank you. Mike McNally, do you want to?
Yes, hi. Stephen, very interesting to hear your story even more. I mean, obviously we've known each other for a while, but what is very interesting for me is that, there's like a level of reconciliation that Northern Ireland has to come to, and you're, as a Jewish boy in a Catholic Protestant land, you are almost like a light in a tunnel for what could be like the odd one out, so to speak, but not the odd one out. As you know, I'm a Catholic boy that joined that police service that you witnessed that officer being murdered at that football match, David Pearce, and that I never heard that story before from you, and understood. Excuse me. I understand why that's so emotive for you, and it is just that reconciliation. That's a power thing that the world needs to have more, so where we can see those things and we can deal with them. Because I think many of you are probably from England and don't have, maybe never had as much of the news from Northern Ireland. But Stephen, just when you were speaking about that, it just hit me so hard, that there is something we still have to do here with reconciliation, even with those soldiers that were murdered over here, and how they could be almost like in memory of them, that something could happen over here. And you are absolutely 100% like a beacon of light in that. And I just wanted to say that. I haven't got a question for you, but that's something that just spoke to me very powerfully there. Thank you.
Well, Mike, I feel a bit of an imposter. If you were to tell the people here this evening your own story, I think they would be falling off their seats. I mean, it's your own life story in terms of reconciliation and where you've come from and your experiences from your childhood and stuff. It is an amazing story, and people should be aware that Mike is involved in something called March for Life, which commemorates the Holocaust from a Christian perspective, and it's a German ministry of reconciliation. And Mike has organised marches in the centre of Belfast to commemorate the Holocaust, which is quite an amazing thing in its own right. The Jewish community is respected, I think, on both sides of the divide. The synagogue was used as a venue for meetings engagement between Protestant and Catholic organisations. It was seen as a neutral venue. When they had problems to sort through, they often asked for a Jewish person to chair those meetings. It could be kind of local issues in North Belfast, perhaps. So the community has played that role as best it could, given its small numbers, etc. But I agree, Mike. I'm very concerned about the situation currently in Northern Ireland. The issues around Brexit and the tensions around COVID has raised people's anxieties and fears anyway, and it's all percolating to the surface again. You've got a younger generation in Northern Ireland, which in some respects is more sectarian than their parents, and you see it in social media. So we are on. It's not plain sailing 20 years after the Good Friday Agreement. So yes, there's work still to be done.
I can't pronounce your name. Is it Jules? Do you want to? You're muted. look at the microphone icon and just touch it. Okay.
Well, while Jules is looking for the unmute,
Yeah.
can I just as a bystander? No, not a bystander, an outsider. I had occasion to visit Northern Ireland for work a number of times in my capacity as a trainer, and people were interested in my background, and I also had the Catholic Jew, Protestant Jew, because I would tell them, I'm a nice boy from nice Jewish boy from northwest London, and they still said to me, yeah, but what foot do you dig with? I mean, but said in a fun, bantering way. I don't think they were like checking me out to see if I was okay. But it occurred to me that people were genuinely interested in where I was coming from, literally and metaphorically.
And I'll take a bet you didn't tell them you'd been in the RAF for a long time.
I served at Aldergrove for a very short time.
No. So I think, Jules, you're up and running. You can ask.
Yes, I do apologise. We got there eventually. Steve, great chat. I have to say, fantastic. All I want to say, as a Protestant who lived in London for 13 years and has been back here now for almost 13, it has been extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. You did touch on the whole sectarian. I don't think that'll ever go, to be honest. I don't think it'll ever go. For me, my daughter was physically assaulted in the street just over 4 weeks ago because of the uniform that she's wearing, which is a grammar school, which is predominantly Protestant. We'll not delve into it too much, but I just wanted to let you know that is what we're still up against.
Still going on today. Yeah, shocking.
Absolutely. I was born on the West Bank of Londonderry. I'm sure if you look up the history, there was a mass exodus of the Protestants due to the Troubles, and they all headed to the East Bank. And from a very young age, I always vowed I never would. And I moved to London when I was 19 years old with £500 in my back pocket and didn't know anyone. And I went to North London University. I got my degree and I worked up until the age of 30. And my last job was for an Israeli company. And I'll tell you what, it was a godsend. It was a godsend. But the biggest mistake I ever made was coming back. The only blessing, Stephen, and all of you's here, I have a daughter now, as I'm sure you know. But there's a lot more work to be done here, unfortunately. A lot more work to be done here. And it's a shame. It's an absolute shame. And it breaks my heart because we now have to move. Something I said I would never do. We're now on the emergency list to get moved over to the East Bank of Londonderry. I just wanted to let you guys know this is the reality. And yes, you spoke about the very few Jewish people that is left here in Northern Ireland. I would love to link in with every single one of them, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And it's a shame because you personally, I think you have a platform and it's amazing. And in fact, I would love for you to come to my daughter's school next year on the International Holocaust Day Remembrance to do a talk. And I mean that.
Do it. I've been speaking at a school in Oma, which is a Catholic school, Loretto College.
Yeah.
And so I would come up to that school if they would have me. I'd be
absolutely.
It's good to share that, because sometimes us exiles have kind of nostalgic yearnings about Northern Ireland. It's good to be reminded of the horrible realities that many people are still experiencing over there.
But as I say, the godsend was Israel. And I've been there, and I'm just hoping and praying me and my daughter can get going there next year to show her what a fantastic place it is. Can I just finish on a wee light note? It was just a wee tweet that came up here. It was just a couple of weeks ago, actually, and it was a guy called Mark Thompson, and he tweeted, "On Sunday past, a friend told me of a holiday he had in Israel some years ago. An Israeli man heard his accent and said, 'Are you from Northern Ireland?' 'Yes,' he said. 'I live near a small village called Malil.' 'I know Malil,' said the man. 'My father was a Jewish refugee there.'"
Yeah.
I then went and did my research. The Malil Kinder Farm. Never knew until I read that tweet. So thank you. And thank you, Stephen, for all you do. Thank you.
I'm going to, it's 9 o'clock, and we said we would run for about an hour, and I don't see any more hands up, so I hope I haven't missed anybody. I just want to, before I thank Stephen, finally, I've been to Belfast a few times. Mostly, I was privileged enough to be asked to go and talk at various meetings. And I was saying before the meeting, I had that experience of arriving in Belfast to talk at a meeting at the Europa Hotel, to be told by the taxi driver it was the most bombed city in Europe, which I hadn't been aware of until he told me. But my first visit, I walked around the streets into the shops, and I was still quite surprised by the number of security gates that was still there across many of the main streets in Belfast. Then on a subsequent visit, we did probably the mandatory taxi tour of all the artwork, the wall art and the murals, which are amazing. But the thing that really struck me about them is what a tiny part of Belfast the Troubles actually took place in. It's a sort of little bit in the centre of Belfast, and the rest of it was, I won't say untouched, because it clearly wasn't, but wasn't involved in the sort of mass sort of killings and bombings that we heard about. Can I thank you, Stephen, so much for doing what was clearly at times a very difficult talk. It was clearly a very emotional talk for you to give to us. I think we all felt that. It was absolutely fascinating for those of us who don't know anything about it. I think I want to thank everybody who's contributed as well in asking questions or talking a bit about their own experiences in Ireland. And I look forward to perhaps being able to see you again. I know you've now made contact with Harvey, one of our members, to talk about the Jewish history in Nottingham. So maybe we'll see you up here one day as well. So thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for giving us your time and giving us your talk.
Thank you. Indeed, I look forward to visiting Nottingham, please God, someday soon.
So I'll tap on behalf of everybody else who's doing it virtually. Thank you so much, and thank you to Norman and Kathy for doing the Zoom hosting this evening. You've done it remarkably smoothly, so thank you very much indeed. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks,
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Night.
I'm going to cut and run.
Okay. You need to turn the recording off.
Well, that's Mike, I think, has to do that. Has Mike gone? Okay, I'll turn the record. Okay. I can't hear you, Kath.
What about the live streaming?
Yeah, I'm just going to stop the